Before we get started on tonight's class, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakya Muni Buddha. Namo Shakya Muni Buddha. Namo Shakya Muni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. So tonight's class, Quang, I believe, will be finishing up the last of the 16 Arhats at the introduction of the Amitabha Sutra, which means that we are almost done with the very first paragraph of the sutra after I don't know how many months it's been, but it's been many months. But I hope it's been a productive and educational few months of getting to know these arhats and their backgrounds and their stories and their reasons to be. So we'll be finishing up the arhats, the remaining arhats, and then the remaining handful of bodhisattvas that are mentioned. And then we finally get into the good stuff. We were planning to take a break in September. However, we are canceling that break. So we will continue through that. Or I should say, Quang Hian and I will both be continuing through that. As well as the meditation class. So the meditation class we do have, I'm expecting 2 more classes to finish up the last of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So we'll take up the remaining of August, and then September I will do an overview, kind of a summary going back through all 4. And then starting in October, we'll still have class, but again, as I mentioned before, it will just be meditation. So we'll come in for some instruction for meditation if it's needed, depending on who's here. And then we will just sit for meditation for about 45 minutes and then do some walking meditation after that. And then once the first paragraph is completed of the Amitabha Sutra, then I will continue on my end until November. I will be gone for the entire month of November. I'll be on retreat. And so Quang Hian will continue on with the Sutra class and the meditation class and Sunday services. So, with that said, I'll let Quang Hian go ahead and continue with his Arhat besties. Thank you, Quang Hian. Namo Shakyamuni.
Okay, so as Tai Quang Tri mentioned that we'd be finishing the Arhats today, I'm going over 7, which seems quite a lot, but these accounts of these 7 Arhats aren't as vast as the other Arhats as I've gone over. A lot of the accounts that are attributed to them are mostly fantastic accounts, and so today will be a little more fun than the other accounts that I've given. So the first one we'll go over today is Rahula. Rahula is Prince Siddhartha's son. He is the Buddha's son. And some say that he was born on the day that Prince Siddhartha left home, on the day of his renunciation. His name means fetter, which means that it's considered that his birth was an obstacle of Siddhartha's enlightenment on his spiritual journey. And though he had left home, his mother, or Rahula's mother, Prince Vasudhara, was not necessarily angry with Siddhartha, though she was more sorrowful because she knew that this was always going to be Siddhartha's destiny to become the Buddha and take this spiritual path. It's also said that Siddhartha decided to wait until his son was born so that a successor could continue his family's lineage. But then also there's other fantastic accounts of Rahula's birth. One such that instead of being born on the Siddhartha's renunciation day, he was actually conceived on Siddhartha's renunciation day. And that for 6 years, Rahula had dwelled in the womb of his mother and was finally born on the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. And it's kind of said that the reason for this long gestation period was because of the previous karma of both the queen, or the princess, and the son. It's said that the princess in a previous lifetime, she was a cowhand, that she was helping out her mother milk some cows. And as they got done milking them, her mother had said, "Here's your pails to take back to the house, here's my pails." And the daughter just kind of disregarded her mother, walked back by herself, not taking any of the pails with her. And thus the mother, for 6 leagues, which is about 18 miles, had to carry these pails all by herself, thus leading to, in the next lifetime, 6 years of a gestation period, to where Rahula, in a previous lifetime, is said to have plugged up a mouse hole in a house for 6 days, thus killing all the mice in that hole. Thus, in comparison, he was plugged up in the womb for 6 years before he was born. And then finally, when he was born, there was much drama that went along in the kingdom, to where, because the son just appeared 6 years later and Yasodhara was not married, this was seen as this wasn't seen in good light, to where many of the subjects were saying, "Oh, she's been sleeping around with other men, she's not married, and thus she had a kid." But then a lot of other subjects were on Yasodhara's side, saying that, no, she's a very pure woman. She has not seen any men. She's mostly been inside the kingdom walls since Prince Siddhartha had left. But even though she had pleaded with people saying that this was the Siddhartha's true son, many did not believe her, and the community actually wanted to put her to death. So they had dug a large hole for her, filled it with fire, and they were going to go push her in. But then right as the princess and the son were about to jump in, she had pronounced a act of truth, which is to mean that she had said, "If this is Siddhartha's true son, as we jump in this fire, we will not be burned." And then as her and Rahula were pushed into the fire, the flames had vanquished, and a pond arose, and a large lotus flower came up to capture both the princess and the son, thus stating that act of truth that this was Siddhartha's true son. So then sometime later that was the fantastic account. So after that, after the Buddha's enlightenment, he had came back sometime later to the kingdom to visit his father. And upon being received, Yasodhara did not want Rahula to meet his father, the Buddha. But then after a great fascination with this great ascetic that was wandering the kingdom, she finally allowed Rahula to meet his father. And she said, "As you go meet your father, I would like you to ask him for his riches. Since you're the next in line, you should inherit everything that he has." And as Rahula approached the Buddha, he had let his son know that he had something better than the material riches for him, and anything better than material possession. Because the Buddha had known that running a kingdom was a fleeting journey, and that this was ultimately lead to a bunch of suffering, and he did not want his son to go through with that. So he decided to give his son the gift that would not perish, and the Buddha exclaimed to his son, "I will give you the wealth I obtained under the tree of enlightenment, thus making you the heir to an inheritance that will not perish." Which was to renounce that life and to learn what it means to attain nirvana, what it means to lead a path, or lead a life cultivating the Eightfold Path. So Rahula had followed the Buddha back to his temple, and he had Shariputra ordain his son as the first novice monk. Novice monk meaning that he was just a child and he was not yet an adult. But then word got back to the king that his grandson had been ordained as a monk, and he was very shocked, as he would be, because now his lineage is kind of gone, since his grandson was not going to produce any more heirs. This was the end of the line. And then the king had also noticed that a bunch of other royal family members, such as his brother's sons, so the king's nephews, Ananda and Devadatta, they had also been ordained as monks. So all the royal family kept disappearing. So he had requested that the Buddha make a rule saying that children must get the permission from their parents before they wish to become monastics and renounce lay life. To which the Buddha then obliged, and he made the rule saying that children must get parental permission before they can join the monastic life. So then during Rahula's youth, the Buddha had a lot of one-on-one sessions with Rahula. And a lot of the talks that he had with him were more set for his age because he was so young. To where in a lot of his discourses, he had a lot of vivid metaphors, and he had to, for lack of a better word, dumb things down because of his age. He had to explain it in a way that his son could understand. So in one of these discourses, he had talked about the importance of telling the truth, and he used the pail that you wash your feet as a metaphor. So where when you get done washing your feet, the pail has very little water in it. He used this to describe a liar as one with very little water inside them, the water representing contemplation. They're not necessarily thinking as they're lying. So where the Buddha had then dumped over the pail and said, now there's no more water in this. This is similar to a liar, to where they live a hollow and empty existence. In another discourse, the Buddha had mentioned, used the object of a mirror to talk about self-reflection. He asks his son Rahula, what is the purpose of a mirror? To where Rahula replied, the purpose of a mirror is to reflect, to see yourself in it. To where the Buddha said, this is very important in the cultivation of the path. It is very wise to reflect on your thoughts, speech, and actions. But to reflect on them in a way of before the thought arises, as the thought arises, and as the thought has passed. Similar going down the line, before you say something, as you're saying something, and after you're saying something, and even further, before you commit actions, as you're committing actions, and after you have committed those actions. And then upon reflection, you would think to yourself, was this helpful to others? Was this helpful to myself? Or was this unbeneficial to others? Did I harm anyone as I was doing these things? And if these are beneficial, then you want to continue to do them to not only benefit yourself, but to others around you. And if these are not helpful to yourself and to others, it said this is wise to abandon these things. And Rahula, through growing up, he had a genuine desire to learn and practice everything he had learned. For his practice became so deep that no matter what he was doing, he was very mindful in no matter the situation, to where he could be sweeping, he could be cleaning, he could be washing dishes, or even as he was using the restroom, he was mindful the whole time. His mind never strayed. To where it's said that he could enter samadhi at any one moment, meaning that he had one point concentration and he was just focused on the one thing he was doing. And in his learnings, it was finally the teaching on impermanence that led Rahula to fully attain the fruit of arhatship. The Buddha had declared his son Rahula the foremost in learning due to his patience and his diligence for constantly cultivating his practice, for always being mindful in everything that he was doing. And though he was the son, the Buddha himself did not really show favoritism to him. He treated him just like any other of his students. To where the Buddha's love was more universal, to where he even loved his most problematic monks, such as Devadatta, as he did his own son. To where even though he had one-on-one teachings with Rahula, these teachings did not differ in nature from any other teachings that he would give his other monks. To where his relationship with his son was friendly and trusting, but it was not very intimate as a father and a son. It was more along the lines of a teacher and a student. And he did this mostly so that Rahula would not develop an attachment to his father. To where at the age of 20, Rahula finally fully ordained as a monk. Although not much is discussed about the death of Rahula, it is said that he did die before the Buddha's death. Similar to how Shariputra and Mahamoddallayana, they had both died before the Buddha's death. And though Rahula himself is sort of a symbol in two aspects, he's seen on one hand as being the son of the Buddha, he's seen as a hindrance to the spiritual path, because if you have children or if you have people that rely on you, it's hard to fully dedicate to your practice. You have other responsibilities, such as your family. So on the other hand, he's seen as that any child, any person is born with the potential for enlightenment, even young children, because even before the age of 20, he had attained the status of arhat. So that is the story of Rahula. The next we will go on to Gavanpati. This is a strange one. His name itself means cow cud or ruminating ox, because he had this very strange habit of always snorting, always smacking his lips, or always just making nasty, distracting noises with his mouth as he was walking, whatever he was doing. To where the Buddha had explained to his Sangha the reason why he is, I guess, annoying in this nature is because in a previous lifetime he was also a monk, but he had ridiculed someone. In particular, he had ridiculed a Prateka Buddha, to where this Prateka Buddha at the time had no teeth, and Gavanpati had walked past this Prateka Buddha eating, and he was slurping the food because he had no teeth, and it took him a long time to eat because he could not chew the food very well. To where Gavanpati made the comment, "You sound and look like a cow chewing its cud." To where the Prateka Buddha then replied that there's always an effect to every cause, and that Gavanpati should feel the shame for his speech. To where Gavanpati had replied, "Repent for what? Why should I beg for your forgiveness?" So then, as a result of this careless act, he was then reborn as a cow for many lifetimes, to where he had developed these qualities of always making these smacking lip noises as a cow would as it's chewing its meal. To where finally, when he was born again as a human, he had finally met Shakyamuni Buddha and then ordained as a monk underneath him. And upon ordaining, he learned to cultivate the path rather quickly and soon attained the fruit of arhatship. And though he was an arhat, he had a very large knowledge of the Dharma, understood much of the Dharma, but his old habits persisted because of being reborn as a cow for so many lifetimes, to where it was said that the Buddha did not want him to go on alms rounds because of his distracting and annoying nature, to where he feared that laymen would make the same mistake that Gavanpati did in the previous lifetime, and thus reap the rewards of ridiculing someone. So the Buddha had told Gavanpati, "You're not meant for this world. The people wouldn't understand the things that you've achieved. They wouldn't understand the things that you've done. So I would like you to go live in one of the heavenly realms up with the devas, because they can see past your physical qualities. They won't mock you for the sounds that you make, and they will see you for the deeds that you've done and the things that you have attained." So Gavanpati had went up to heaven to attain heavenly rewards rather than the earthly ones. And then finally, when the Buddha had died and the first Buddhist council had met, Mahakashyapa had sent a monk to one of the heavenly realms to go find Gavanpati and asked him to join the council. And though Gavanpati was delighted to hear this, he was not very well in the heavenly realms. He knew that his time was coming, that his final death was about to occur. So he did not attend the first Buddhist council, though he did offer to the Sangha his 3 robes and his alms bowl as gifts to them. And it's also said by the Buddha that Gavanpati was the foremost in heavenly blessings. So that's the story of Gavanpati. The next one we will talk about is Pindola. His name means unmoving sharp roots. Pindola was born into a royal family, but he did not get very much satisfaction being in the royal life. He saw and admired a lot of the monks out on their alms rounds, and how they would get food, how they would get gifts, and they were very much admired by the community. And he thought to get this for himself, so he went to the Buddha and asked to be ordained. But he kind of did this for the wrong reasons. He wanted the gifts of being a monk rather than to be a monk to end his own suffering. So where this greediness got the best of him, to where he himself would go on alms rounds. He had a much larger bowl than the other monks, so he could gather more food for himself. And though he was greedy, he did cultivate his practice very well, and soon had developed the psychic and spiritual powers of a highly attained monk. But this was more to his detriment, as I'll get to in a second. Because one day there was a layman who had set up a challenge for people around him. He had this very nice sandalwood bowl to where he placed on a stick, and he put it high up into the air. And he had announced to the community saying, anyone who can get this stick off of, or anyone who can get this bowl off of this pole is welcome to have it. But you must jump to get it. And this pole was very high to where no normal person could reach this. But then Pandola's greediness got the best of him, to where he did use his spiritual powers to get the bowl. He had levitated up into the air, picked the bowl off of the pole, and come back down. To where the Buddha was there to witness this. And he immediately admonished Pandola, saying, you had broken one of the rules of showing your spiritual powers casually to lay people. This is very frowned upon. And there was a consequence for this actions, to where the Buddha had told him, because you have done this, you will never fully attain nirvana. And the Buddha had told him, you will stay in the world acting as a field of blessings for living beings. And so, upon this admonishment, Pandola had taken it very seriously. He had felt a large remorse for his greediness and did what he could to curb this greediness, and finally cultivated the path for the right reasons, and to work to benefit others, to practice generosity for the good reason, not for doing it for blessings, not for doing it to show that you're better than others. He had done this to genuinely benefit others, not thinking of himself. Until finally he did attain the fruit of arhatship. And it's said that Pandola does still remain in the world, but no one knows where. And though when people do make offerings to the triple gem, Pandola is there to receive the blessings. And upon receiving these blessings, he will then use his spiritual powers to confer wisdom, to grant wishes, and to protect those making offerings from misfortune or any harm that is coming to them. So where the Buddha had announced Pandola, he is foremost in giving blessings. So now we will go to the next Arhat. This one is another fantastic story. This is the Arhat Kaladayan. This was before Siddhartha had become the Buddha. Kaladayan was a subject of Siddhartha, to where he had known him in his royal life. And then upon coming back to the kingdom, Kaladayan had noticed the Buddha, and he wanted to continue to serve him, just like he had served him when he was a prince. So he had asked to be ordained under him. And at first it's said that Kaladayan had trouble keeping the precepts, though through his intense practice he was able to break his attachments, he was able to cultivate the path well, and eventually attain the fruit of arhatship. And it's said that he was able to convert over 1,000 families and have over 1,000 certified sages in the area of Shavasti as a disciple of the Buddha. And though he does have some strange accounts that did happen to him at the end of his life, his name itself, Kaladayan, or Dayan, means black light, because he was born with very dark skin, but he had this very strange glow to him, sort of this aura, and he had these very radiant, glowing eyes. So where it said one night he decided to take a stroll, and on his stroll he had walked by this pregnant woman, to where upon seeing this dark figure, though was glowing with these glowing eyes, she immediately had a miscarriage and then died as well. To where the news got around to the Buddha saying, this should not happen anymore. So he made the rule that monastics are not allowed to take walks alone at night, for fearing that they don't cause death to any other people when they walk by. His death itself is also quite gruesome as well. It was said that as on one of his alms rounds, he had witnessed a love affair of a Brahma woman. And for fear that he would tell her husband, she had faked being sick and then called out to him, "Oh, I'm very sick, I'm on my deathbed, I need you to come take a look at me and see what is wrong with me." To where he had heard this and then entered into where she was staying. But then as he had opened up the door, she had had one of her servants with an axe cut off his head as he was coming through the door, thus decapitating him and ending his life. So this was such as the story of Kaladayan. Although before his death, he was known as the foremost teacher who taught and converted the greatest number of people to Buddhism. So the next Arhat we'll go over is Mahakafina. He was born the son of a king in the town of Kakuta. And when his father died, he assumed the throne immediately. And upon taking the throne, a lot of his subjects and a lot of the tradesmen that had came into the town, they all had learned about the appearance of the triple jewel in a nearby town of Shavasti. To where this really fascinated him, and he became quite attractive to Buddhism. To where his attraction grew so much, he wanted to go offer gifts to the Buddha. He wanted to go meet the Buddha himself, hearing that he was such a great ascetic. And to where the king had gathered 1,000 of his subjects, and along with his queen, she had gathered 1,000 of her subjects, and they set off to go visit the Buddha in Shavasti. And along the way, they were said to have crossed 3 rivers, and because they had such a large crowd with them, it was very hard to get all the horses, all the people over these large rivers. To where it's said that Mahakafina then also proposed an act of truth. He had said, if this teacher we are going to see is a Samsam Buddha, let not even a hoof of the horses be wetted while crossing these rivers. To where this was indeed a true statement. And as the travelers went across these rivers, not a single one of them got wet. They were able to cross over these rivers as if they were solid ground. So they crossed the rivers Aravacha, Nilavahana, and Chandarbhaga. The third river in particular, the Buddha was, all along this journey, the Buddha was watching them with his divine eye, anticipating their arrival. And finally, when they had crossed this third river, the Buddha had finished his midday meal and then set off to go meet Mahakafina. To where when they finally met the Buddha upon crossing this third river, they were astounded by his presence, to where they immediately prostrated towards him. And the Buddha has spoke his dharma to all these subjects, the king and the queen. And upon hearing the dharma, they were immediately convinced that this was the way that they should be living their lives. And each one of them retired from their lay life, and they all wanted to be ordained under the Buddha. And to where it said that Mahakafina, he cultivated the path very quickly and quickly attained the fruit of arhatship. And after attaining arhatship, everywhere he went, he always exalted this one phrase, "Oh happiness, oh happiness." To where a lot of the monks were confused, and they were thinking that, well, he used to be a king. Maybe he's still dwelling in the happiness of his former rulership. To where the Buddha had corrected them, saying that, no, it's not the happiness of the rulership that he's talking about. He's dwelling in the happiness of nirvana. He has finally reached that point of cessation. And throughout his learning, this Mahakashapa was foremost in the knowledge of astrology. Or Mahakafina, I should say. So that was the story of Mahakafina. The sixth arhat that we'll go over today is Vakula. Vakula itself means good bearing. And this is due to something he had done in a previous lifetime. He was in the time of the Buddha. I don't have his name, but in the lifetime of a previous Buddha, he had given a lot of Indian fruits to a Prateka Buddha that was visiting his town. And upon giving these good fruits to him, he was rewarded with having very long and healthy future lives, to where he would live, it was said, for He would go through these lifetimes, I would say, for many aeons. He would live a very healthy life, die, be born again, live another healthy life, and be born again. Until finally, when he was born into life of Shakyamuni Buddha, he lived to be 160 without ever having taken on any illnesses, without ever having conceived any physical pain. And it's said that because of this, in his previous lifetimes, he made a vow not to ever kill. So, though he lived this healthy life, he also helped other people, any sentient being around him, also live a long, healthy life by always respecting them, by never wanting to kill them. Not even bugs, not even any trees, not even the smallest beings. To where it was said that in the lifetime of the Buddha, he had attained what was called the 5 kinds of a death-free retribution. To where it said when Vakula was born, unlike many children born at the time who were crying as they were being born, it was said that Vakula was born smiling and sat fully upright in lotus position as he was being born. To where this very much frightened his mother, and she saw that, what is this monster that I have given birth to? Why is he not crying? Why is he in lotus position and smiling and laughing? To where she became disgusted by this. She did not want to be a mother of this monster. So she had made the declaration to kill her son. She had dug a pit and filled it with fire and then thrown her son into the fire. And upon a few hours later to see if the flames had settled, the flames did settle, and she expected to see a dead infant there, but instead saw her son still giggling and laughing, unharmed by the flames. To where this freaked her out even more, saying, this must be even a larger monster than I initially thought. So she said, well, flames didn't kill him. Maybe I can kill him by boiling him alive. To where she got a large pot, filled it with water, put it over fire, and thrown her son into the pot and closed the lid on top of it. And to where a few hours later, she came back to see an unboiled son still laughing and giggling. To where she thought, well, it seems that heat doesn't affect this child. Maybe throwing him into the ocean would, deal the final blow. To where that's what she had done. She had taken her son to the seashore, thrown him in, but he didn't drown. To where also of him not drowning, a large fish had came up, swallowed the son whole, and the fish had disappeared. To where a few days later, that same fish had been caught by a local fisherman, and upon gutting the fish, the child came out unfazed. He was still laughing and giggling. To where this is what is meant by the 5 kinds of death-free retribution. He cannot be killed by being burned alive, could not be killed by being boiled alive, could not die by drowning, could not be crushed, thus the large fish chomping down on him, and he could not be killed by stabbing, because when the fisherman had cut open the fish, he had used a knife to stab the fish. So this was the story of Rakula, lived to be 160 and never once faced an illness or any pain. To where the last arhat we'll go over today is Anuruddha. Anuruddha itself means never poor. And he acquired this name because in a previous lifetime he had lived through a great famine in India. So where this famine was so bad that people had to resort to eating just blades of grass or just bugs they had come across in their path. And at this time, there was a Prateka Buddha living in this town to where he went on alms rounds. Because of this famine, he was not able to get any food. So he went back to where he was staying. And upon returning to his dwelling, he came across a farmer, a rice farmer in particular, who he only had enough food for himself, but he had told the Prateka Buddha, you're much more worthy of me to receive this rice, so I will give this to you. You can take my lunch. And the Prateka Buddha had taken this lunch, and he had finished eating this lunch, and he had done what was called the 8 miraculous changes before Anuruddha. These are 18 miraculous changes. These 18 miraculous changes are, I'll go through them, numbering them. Number 1 is to shoot water out of your right hand. Number 2 is to shoot fire out of your right hand. Number 3 is shoot water out of your right hand. Number 4 is to shoot water out of your left hand. 5 is to shoot water out of the upper part of your body. 6 to shoot fire out of the lower part of your body, 7 to shoot water out of the bottom part of your body, and to shoot fire off the top part of your body. And number 9 is to walk on water as if it were land. Number 10 is to swim on the ground as if it were water. 8 is to disappear into the sky and thus appear out of the ground. Number 12 is to disappear into the ground and thus appear coming out of the sky. Number 13 is to walk in midair. 14 to stand in midair. 15 to sit in midair, and 16 to lie down in midair. And then 17 and 18 are to manifest a large body in the sky, and the opposite, to manifest this very small body in the sky. And these 18 miraculous changes are supposed to be metaphors for someone that deeply cultivates meditation, deeply cultivates the path. So where the first 8 that I had talked about, to be able to shoot fire and water out of various parts of your body, to where when you go into very deep meditation, you're able to, through very deep breath work, kind of control the temperature of your body, to where if you're meditating in a very cold climate, you're able to bring out this heat to cool you or to heat you up. So where similarly, if you're meditating in a very hot climate, you can use your breath work to bring down your body heat. And to where walking on water and swimming in land, this is supposed to represent someone that deeply cultivates the path. They're not obstructed by any obstacles in their way. If you're walking on a path and there's a large mountain, you're able to swim up that mountain as if it's nothing. And if you come across some water, you're able to walk across it as if it were nothing. So they don't let things obstruct their way. And to disappear into the sky and to reappear in the ground, or to disappear into the ground is to meet in the sky, is to know your place in your teaching. So where you show up at the right time, you also leave at the right time. You don't overstay your welcome. Numbers 13 through 16, sitting, lying down, walking, and standing, all in midair, have to do with very deep meditation, particularly the jhanas. Because when you enter these deep states of meditation, you sort of lose contact with all your physical senses, and it feels like you are floating. So where the 4 things talked about, walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, these are 4 different various types of meditation. And the 17 and 18, being able to manifest a large body in the sky, is to able to spread your teachings far and wide. You're able to teach to a very large audience. And then also to make your body very small is to be the person that how do I say this? To be able to teach the right way to help out the person in need, to where you know the correct teachings, you know how to help the person in the right way. So those are the 8 miraculous changes that this Pratyeka Buddha had done in front of Aniruddha. To where it said he did these 8 miraculous changes and then he just left. And upon leaving, Aniruddha was pursued by this rabbit that came hurling at him, to where he tried to get away, but the rabbit eventually caught up to him and latched onto his back. And he had tried to shake off this rabbit, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not shake this rabbit off his back. So he had, being terrified, he went back home to his wife to see if she could help him get this rabbit off of his back. And though they sat there struggling, trying to get this thing off of him, eventually turned into a gold statue. And they would end up breaking off the limbs of this rabbit statue, and they would just grow back. So they had this endless amount of gold at their disposal, thus making Aniruddha, his name being never poor. So then now, let me see. In the lifetime of the Buddha, he was, or the Shakyamuni Buddha, I should say, he was one of the Buddha's cousins, similar to Ananda and Devadatta. Those were his 2 brothers. So when the Buddha had came back to the palace of where he lived as a prince after his enlightenment, he had taken Ananda with him, he had taken Devadatta with him, he took his son Rahula with him, and he took his other cousin Aniruddha with him. That's why the king was so upset, going, "You're taking all the royal children away from me. Our royal lines are perishing." And so Aniruddha had ordained as a monastic. But then during the lectures of the Buddha, he found himself becoming very sleepy, and he would often fall asleep during a lot of the Buddha's lectures. To where after one particular lecture, the Buddha had admonished him saying, hey, how can you sleep like an oyster or a clam? Sleep for 1,000 years, but you'll never hear the Buddha's name. And upon hearing this admonishment, he was very shaken, and he realized the error of his ways and said, I will do what I can to practice the path more vigorously and to not fall asleep during these lectures. And after this admonishment, Shariputra had came to Aniruddha to give him a meditation object. As Shariputra had done with all the other monks, he had given various meditation objects to new monks coming in. So where the meditation object that Shariputra had given Aniruddha was the 8 thoughts of a great man or a great being. And I'll go over these 8 thoughts. The first 8 thought is, this Dharma is one for who has little wants, not for one who wants a lot. This Dharma is for one who is contented, not the discontented. This Dharma is for the recluse, not one who is fond of society. This Dharma is for the energetic, not for the lazy. This Dharma is for the one well-established in mindfulness, not one for the confused. This Dharma is one for the composed, not for the uncomposed. This Dharma is for the wise, not the unwise. And the 8th one, this Dharma is for one who is free of impediments, not for one who delights in impediments. And so for 7 days, it said that Aniruddha had meditated on this object of meditation. Without sleeping, without eating, he just sat there, meditated on all these 8 thoughts. To where it said that he had mastered all first 7 of these thoughts, but he had trouble cultivating and understanding what the 8th thought had truly meant. To where throughout these 7 sleepless days and nights, and because he wasn't eating at the time, he soon developed a blindness and could not see afterwards. To where in his blindness, the Buddha had come up to him to thoroughly instruct Aniruddha about what the 8th thought had meant. And through this insight that he had gained from the Buddha, he soon did develop what it meant to realize that 8th thought, and he soon attained the fruit of arhatship. And upon becoming an arhat, he had acquired what's called the divine eye, which is like seeing, but it's better. To where we've gone over what the divine eye was before with Mahamagdalena. He was one who had also attained that divine eye. To where Aniruddha was considered an affectionate monk. He was also a very loyal monk to the Buddha, to where he did what he could to be by his side whenever he could. So much so that when the Buddha was about to enter nirvana while he was on his deathbed, Aniruddha was with him along with Ananda. And then finally in the Buddha's death meditation, Ananda had stated that the Exalted One has attained the final nirvana. And then Aniruddha with his divine eye could see, yes, this was true. The Buddha was now going into the final cessation, to where then the Buddha then did pass into cessation. So where now it's said that Aniruddha, he did play a great role in the first Buddhist council because he was an arhat. He did meet that one requirement to join the council. To where he helped the assembly collect a lot of the Buddha's discourses, a lot of his teachings, so they could be preserved throughout time. And then Aniruddha died of the age of 150 in the shade of a bamboo grove in the Vajida country. So that is the 18th arhat, the last arhat that I will go over. These were a little more fantastic accounts, and hope they were a little more fun than the other, more strict, I should say, more sound accounts of the other arhats. So if anyone has any questions about these last 7 or any of the other arhats, I will gladly take those questions.
Do they all have different accounts? Did you find more than one story about each? And how difficult was it to find all the stories? I don't know what I'm asking. I'm just curious, does Rob, because it seems like he's got more than the story, like when I read One
Path, One Cloud.
Yeah, that book. There was just more, there was different information. How did you determine what would follow?
So yeah, that was one hardship that I had come across in a lot of these arhat accounts, to where in different sects of Buddhism, they kind of viewed the arhats differently. To where whether you were a monk in Thailand, whether you were a monk in Cambodia, whether you were a monk in Japan or China or India at the time, they all kind of saw the arhats differently. So the way that I had done this is I tried to stick the closest to the Pali Canon, to where a lot of the accounts I gave were from that, to where one of them that I had talked about, Magdalena, when he went to go visit his mother in the Hungry Ghost realms, there's a different story in the Thai tradition than it is in the Pali Canon. So I stuck with the Pali Canon story, to where even Rahula, the Pali Canon says that he was born on the day of that Siddhartha left home. But then another account, I guess just for fun today, I had told of a different one, to where that's a Chinese account. Yeah. So I did what I could to stick to one canon, to where I very much could have looked at like what the Japanese had said, what the Indian had said, what the Cambodians had said, but I didn't want to mix it up too much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, if there's no more questions, I will hand the platform back over to Tai Quang Tree.
Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you, Quang Hian. These truly fantastical stories of monks literally scaring someone to death and getting beheaded and going to heavenly realms and floating in air. One of the hardships of learning Buddhism is trying to separate these fantastical stories to truth, to real Dharma, right? And we'll see a lot of this fantastical stuff in a lot of sutras too, especially when we read even in the Amitabha Sutra, but especially in especially in a lot of Mahayana sutras, right? Because even in the Lotus Sutra, for instance, in one of the later chapters, it's those 18 miraculous powers were done by these two brothers that were trying to convince their heretical father to go meet the Buddha, right? And it's because of these powers that they were displaying that they were able to convince the father to go see the Buddha. But as it was mentioned, right, these powers are similes, right? They're parables to other things. And this is why I emphasize quite often the importance to learning the background of sutras and the background of specific teachings. Because if you just go in as a new person to read the Lotus Sutra, as a great example, it's going to read like a fiction story, right? It's going to read like some rom-com sci-fi story, to be quite honest, right? And to read it in that spirit, right, without knowing the background information, it's going to seem like, all right, well, Buddhism is a bunch of hocus pocus, right? And clearly that's not the case. And so it's important to be able to remember and to recognize that even though we're reading these stories about monks and Buddhas and these people about, floating in the air and doing all these miraculous things, these are just you have to remember these are stories, right? What is the point of a story, right? What is the point of a story? The point of a story is to get your attention. It's to be able to draw you into something. And so to make these fantastical themes is one way to do that. But once you get to the heart of that story, then it's like, all right, this is what they did in order to better their practice, in order to develop their practice, in order to become enlightened, right? All the little hocus pocus prior to that is just to get your attention. And so the sutras are the exact same thing, especially in the Lotus Sutra, right? In every chapter, it starts out with all this stuff, and then you get to the story, or you get to the main point of the chapter. The Amitabha Sutra is the same thing, right? It's stating all these beautiful imagery of what the Amitabha's Pure Line looks like, right? Roads of lapis lazuli and sands that are gold, and these lotus flowers that are as large as carriage wheels, and trees that are made of diamonds, and all these things, right? Just things that just sound out of this world. Or sound like you're on acid, right? You're tripping on acid, you're like, oh, everything's just colorful and moving. But then it gets to the point of all that, right? It's preparing you to have an idea of how pure, how beautiful things can be as an enlightened being. Because an enlightened being doesn't look out in the world and sees trash and sees ditches in the road, doesn't see dying trees, doesn't see ugly or beautiful or right or wrong or big or small. Beings don't see that, right? They just see things as they are. There is no differentiation. There is no separation of good and bad, beautiful and ugly. Everything just is. And so it's telling you all these things to imagine what the Pure Line looks like, so that it gives you confidence in the practice. It gives you confidence, lets you know that once you get into that state of that enlightened mind, then there's no such thing as beautiful and ugly. Everything is beautiful. Everything truly is beautiful, right? There's even the ugly stuff in the world is truly beautiful, really, right? Because if you think about it, in the grand cosmic scheme of things, it took an entire universe to have birthed and have developed for this ugly thing to even exist, right? So think of all the causes and conditions it took just for this one thing to exist. And you're here saying, you have the guts to say that this thing is ugly. And so when we read all these stories, all these accounts, and all these sutras, right, we have to remind ourselves that it's more than superficial nonsense sometimes, right? And this is something I'm trying to teach Quang to be able to let especially newcomers know, right? When they go into the back, for instance, and see the bookshelves of sutras, like, oh, I want to read this sutra. No, you don't. No, you don't. How long have you been practicing? A few weeks, a few months. No, you don't. Absolutely not. I will not ever give you a sutra. If you've been practicing for less than 1 year, you will not get a sutra from me. Because it won't make any sense to you. It will not make any sense to you. And so avoid sutras. For those of you that are newish to Buddhism, avoid sutras, because it will be helpful. It will be extremely important to your practice eventually. But starting out, it's not going to be beneficial, if we're being honest here, right? There are some sutras that are beyond these fantastical stories, right? So some of the canonical texts, like the texts on meditation, or texts on causes and effects, other foundational teachings, those are sutras we can stick with. But when you come to sutras like the Amitabha Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, or the Flower Adornment Sutra, or the Shurangama Sutra, or the Lotus Sutras, teachings, sutras that are having more than one teachings, for instance, right? Like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Dormant Sutra, is one of the largest sutras in Buddhism, has a plethora of different teachings. It is so confusing, right? I have even finished reading the sutra. It's so big and it's so comprehensive. But I can acknowledge that that's not the type of sutra that I need, right? Because I know myself, I know what is there and what's missing and what I need. The Avatamsaka Sutra isn't something that I need. The Lotus Sutra is something that I need, because even though the Lotus Sutra, not exactly short, but it's not the longest sutra either. But if we read through it correctly and we meditate on those different chapters, at the end of it, you'll notice that the Lotus Sutra has every foundational teaching you need. 4 Noble Truths, 8-fold Path, practices of the 6 perfections, and meditation. These are literally all you need. That is all you need. Anyway, off my soapbox. Now that we've gone through all the arhats, even though these are the main 16 arhats, right? And we'll see several of them throughout different sutras, especially Shariputra, Mahamoddgalyana, Kashyapa, Ananda, and Rahula. Rahula being the Buddha's or the Siddhartha's biological son, right? What am I trying to say here? It's because they come up often, right, in different sutras and different teachings, right? This is why I wanted to kind of emphasize getting some background information on them. That way you know what they had done, you know their history, you know how they were able to practice, how they were able to develop, and how they're ultimately able to attain enlightenment. And Rahula especially is underrated, right? Rahula was actually a very profound monk, and as Quang mentioned, did not get any really special attention from the Buddha, right? Because we'll see especially in the Lotus Sutra, it's mentioned several times how the Buddha says that I am the father to all sentient beings. Everyone is my child, right? So there's no discrimination between biological children and spiritual children, right? Because at the end of the day, he wants the same thing for all of them, which is freedom, liberation, right? But Rahula is an important figure because a lot of our current precepts that we still have to this day is because of Rahula, right? Especially the novice part, right? A novice, though, at least in Buddhism, early Buddhism, a novice monk specifically pertained to those under the age of 20, right? As Samanera, and Samaneris. Samanera is a male novice and Samanera is a female novice. Nowadays, we still have novices, but they're not specific to age anymore. Now it's just specific to years of ordination. So even though the rule of being 20 still applies, so for instance, our abbess, right, our most venerable abbess, she ordained as a nun at the age of 13. At 13, she went to the monastery. So she was a novice nun all the way up until 20, right? Because 20 is the age of when a monk or a nun can take full ordination. So that's a rule, or that's a rule that still applies till this day. So someone who is not yet at the age of 20 cannot take full ordination. But as ages have gone, as we've gone through time, right, there's less and less people under the age of 20 ordaining. And so we don't use the word novice specifically for those under age of 20. But instead, we use those who are new to monasticism. So even if you were 60 or 70 wanting to ordain, right, you ordain as a novice. And for the most part, depending on the tradition, you're a novice for at least a year, right, before you can take full ordination. And in that full ordination, you can call yourself a fully fledged monk or nun. The other topic that I've heard several times about Rahula, not about Rahula, but about the Buddha leaving Rahula, right? Because Rahula, in the more traditional stories, I know it was a mention in Quang Hin's story, but some of the other stories about Rahula, or about the Buddha leaving his family, is that the Siddhartha had left the palace on the night that Rahula was born. And this story of abandonment has been a grievance for a lot of people throughout time. Because we're thinking, oh my gosh, how did someone literally just up and leave their entire family, right, overnight in this case? But if you really think about it, that makes zero sense that you should have any grievance about someone leaving the family, because all of us have literally left our family. Eventually, everyone leaves their family. It doesn't matter how old you are, right? The only reason you don't leave your family when you're 10 is because you can't fend for yourself in the real world, right? You need support and resources of family and parents to survive. But as soon as you're an adult, we up and leave. So there's no difference between you and the Buddha, right? He just knew at the time that he had to leave for a good reason. But the other part of that story where people ignore is that the Buddha did eventually go back, right? He didn't leave to escape the family. He left in order to find a way so that he can go back and say, listen, I found a way to escape all the suffering that you're enduring. You are royals, but you are suffering still. And so the Buddha went back, right? And when Princess Yashodhara told Rahula to go ask her father for inheritance, right? The Buddha was like, dude, I got no money for you. But what I have is something way better than money. And that is nirvana, freedom, liberation. So not only did he find liberation for himself, he went back and gave Rahula that liberation. He gave his ex-wife that liberation. He gave his father that liberation. He gave his aunts that liberation. He gave the entire family the greatest inheritance anyone can ever possibly get. What is that to grieve over? I don't know. But I also could just be me, because it just could be me. But it's one of those things where you have to, even for your own path, right? You have to, I'll take myself as an example here. Not to toot my own horn, but prior to monkhood, I had a really good life, to be honest, right? I had built my dream home at the age of 25. I don't know how many people can say that, right? By no means did I come from a wealthy family either, right? But I worked hard, and I got degrees and certifications and did this and did that in order to secure my place in the world. I built a house, I had a couple of cars, I traveled often. I had everything I needed. I had no room to say my life sucked, right? But you come to a point, or I came to a point where I can acknowledge or admit to myself that, you know what, all this is great, but it's not real happiness. It's not real happiness, because otherwise I would stop going on vacations. I would stop getting a new car every year. I would stop trying to beautify my home. That's not real happiness. If you're constantly wanting more and more and more, or change, that's not happiness. Right? And so it's kind of that same situation where you have to admit that there needs to be some sort of sacrifice in life in order to get to a point where sacrifice is no longer needed. So yes, I may have taken a dramatic turn in life and left all that behind and became a monk, right? It's an extreme, right? I'll admit that. But it's the right kind of extreme. It wasn't until recently, honestly, that, again, not trying to say anything good about myself, but it was recent where I can sense that to leave such a life and to have a completely opposite type of life took a lot of courage. Because how many people can do that? How many monks and nuns do you see in the world? At least in America. But even in Buddhist countries like Thailand, right? Thailand is 100% a Buddhist country, but there's only like 5% of it that are monastics. So to come to a conclusion or to come to a realization and say that I'm willing to make a sacrifice, I'm willing to build up this courage in order to leave what I believe is going to make me happy and bring me happiness and do something that is, in this case, extreme, well then you're 1,000 steps ahead of anyone else that's trying to find that same liberation. Not that lay people cannot, okay? I've said several times that it is 100% doable for you to become enlightened right now as a layperson, at least as a stream enter, as a Sotapanna. 100% doable. It is not impossible for lay people to become enlightened. The only reason between a layperson's practice and a monastic's practice is the time that you give to yourself to practice. I'm already ready. I'm ready. I am 100% ready to get to the end of the line, the finish line. I know where I'm at. I know how much more I have to do. That's also a difference between a monastic and a layperson. The layperson cannot, for most, see where they're at in the practice, right? Especially if you have a family, if you have a career, you have all these different obligations, it's going to be very difficult to recognize and say, I am at this spot. I am a Sotapanna. A layperson cannot confirm their own Sotapanna realization. It cannot, right? A realization can only be verified by another person that's equally or more realized. So as a Sotapanna, you can recognize other Sotapannas. As a Sakadagami, you can recognize other Satagamins and Sotapannas. As an Anagami, you can recognize all Sakadagamins and Sotapannas, and Arhats can recognize. You get the gist, right? The higher you are, the more you can see. But I can sit here and I can look at people and have conversations with people. I can sense where they're at and how much more they've left. When I have conversations with Quang, I know exactly what's holding him back and exactly what he needs to step over that line. I'm not going to give you the answer, defeats the whole purpose, right? But I'm going to push my students in a way that's going to break them in a way, right? Because, and for me, the moment of my own kind of aha, where I was like, all right, I need to, monasticism is the way. I knew it at the very second I had the realization of complete impermanence. It was my realization of impermanence that just completely changed everything. Completely changed everything. So when I look at things, I'm disgusted with my past life. Disgusted with it. I'm disgusted with the decisions I made. I'm disgusted with the people I surrounded myself with. I'm disgusted about everything that I ever did that I thought was the right thing to do, or was going to bring me this much happiness, or this much money, or this much recognition. Regrets. But at the same time, now I know. Right? This is how wisdom is attained. If you do not know the right path, then you're going to be stuck. If you won't know what 2 plus 2 is until you know what 2 plus 1 is. Right? You won't know how to add unless you know numbers. You won't know how to do formulas unless you know math. Right? There's prerequisites here that are necessary. And the Dharma, as vast and comprehensive as it is, isn't as difficult as most people make it seem it is. Yeah, we sit here and we talk about all these arhats and talk about all these different teachings and the immeasurable amount of sutras that we have, right? Thousands and thousands of sutras. It would be impossible, nearly impossible, for anyone to be able to read through that in one lifetime. Right? I don't even know what my point is with this whole tangent, but the point is, well, not the point, but a point that I would like to make doesn't really have anything to do with this. Is that if you're here, or you're listening, or you're watching, or you're even interested in Buddhism, or interested just in bettering your life, we have to be able to sit down and allow ourselves to say, I will have to be broken. I will have to put myself in situations I never wanted to be in. If you don't like this, good. You're supposed to not like it. This makes you uncomfortable, good. I firmly believe in exposure therapy. 100% believe in it. Because I did it. I went through it. And the only reason I was able to accomplish or attain that realization is because I put myself through extremely uncomfortable situations. That's why you can ask all my students. I push and I pull and I scream and I yell and I don't scream and yell. Or I do things. I'm not all the time, but sometimes I'm intentionally trying to break you, trying to break your thought process. Right? That's exactly what the Buddhist does to his disciples too. Every single disciple, every single arhat that was mentioned thus far had a very uncomfortable object of meditation to take. This object of meditation was something that was the complete opposite of their normal life. You were rich, well, now think about poorness. That's not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Poverty.
Poverty, thank you. Poorness, I'm stupid. Poverty, right? You had sexual desires, now you have to think about the disgust of the body. right? You wanted all these things, think of having nothing at all, right? This is what's going to make you think. This is what's going to put you in situations that makes you uncomfortable, that you don't want to be in. That's the point. Because if you're out doing things you enjoy and like, how are you going to learn? It makes no sense. Like, oh, I want to get over my addiction of music, but yet you still go to concerts. I want to get over my addiction of drinking, but you still go to bars and restaurants. You want to quit something, but you still put yourself in those environments and those situations. It makes no sense to me, right? Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Like, actually stop talking. I think I went over all my notes I wanted to mention. Yes. Any other questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? In this case, emotional outbursts is a good thing, can be a good thing. If it gets you in the right state of mind, at least. Alrighty, well, if there's no other questions or concerns, as I mentioned, we will continue on in September for both classes. Both classes will end, whether we've, well, the meditation class, the teaching part of it will end by September. But the Sutra study will continue on, and the meditation class will continue on until the end of November. And then December and January will be our break. And then we'll come back in February after the Lunar New Year. I don't have a date for Lunar New Year just yet. But typically we have it, all our classes come back after the Lunar New Year. Okay. So we'll go ahead, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times to share the merits in this class. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merits to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.